So in today's episode, I'm going to demonstrate how income from an annuity works, how you can turn on or activate that income, and what it means for one of our clients. This is a 60-year-old with $1 million worth of investable assets. We purchased this annuity in order to make up for some of the loss of her income when she retires, because her expenses are going to be higher throughout retirement than her income will be. So with all that said, let's go ahead and jump into a planning session. So here we are in the planning software, but before we get started, as full disclosure, this is for educational purposes only. It is not meant to be taken as financial or tax advice. Any illustrations that you see during the demonstration will be attached, and you guys will need to open those and review them first for all the disclosures necessary. And so with that said, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the session. This is a 60-year-old client with about $1 million worth of investable assets. I'm going to jump over to a cash flow statement so you guys can see how our income and expenses are working both pre and post retirement. So looking here in the first row, we see that she'll earn $235 this year. If we move over to the right, we see total expenses equal to $212 and some change, and then about $19,000 as planned savings. That's her contributions to a 401k. So the total outflows for the year are $231, and if we subtract those outflows from her income, her inflows, she's positive on the year, $3,900, and that's added to her portfolio assets. Pretty straightforward. The portfolio assets also include growth, and we're growing them at about 4 or 5% per year. She's very conservative as she's coming up on retirement, and that's just her risk tolerance. Now, getting back to that third column, if we make our way down, we see her income is growing over time, and that's because her employer and most will provide a raise to offset the rising cost of goods and services. We get on down here to retirement age. She's going to work through 67, and she'll be retired at 68. Her income drops by about $130,000, call it about 50%, which is a significant drop off. If we move over to the right, her expenses come down too. So her planned distribution contributions to the 401k, those drop off because she's no longer working. And her expenses themselves drop from $225 to $183. So between the two of those, she's gone from about $265 here, $247, all the way down to $183. So she's got about $50K or so drop off in her expenses. However, it so happens that her expenses are higher at retirement than her income, and by a lot, about $43,000 per year. So she's got a shortfall that's fairly significant, and that shortfall is going to be made up from or by her assets. So we'll make a distribution or withdrawal from her retirement savings in order to cover that shortfall. So we see the client has an annual shortfall of about $43,000. It's about $3,600 per month, and she's going to take that from her retirement savings. Now, there are two common strategies to make those distributions. The first, she'll take all the risk on herself by keeping the money invested in the markets. And the second is that she can shift some of that risk over to an insurance company who will, in exchange for a lump sum investment, provide her an income stream for the rest of her life. That's also known as an annuity. Now let's talk about that first option where she's bearing all the risks. Let's assume the client is going to spend 30 years in retirement and that each one of those years cost $1. Let's also assume she has a retirement savings with 30 stocks and each of those is worth $1. In the very first year, she'll withdraw or distribute $1 from her retirement savings to cover the cost of her retirement expenses. Let's assume that in the very next year, the market drops by 50%. Well, now that $29 that she had in that retirement savings account is only worth about $14. So she takes a distribution and she pays that year's retirement expenses. In the very next year, she has 28 years left of retirement. She has $28 owed to retirement. However, she's only got $13 in her retirement savings account. So after 13 years, if we assume the market lays flat, after 13 years, in the 14th year, she will no longer be able to cover the cost of her retirement expenses. Yet she still has 13 or 14 years left. That is where people get into trouble with taking on the risk of retirement, which is why we look at the next option. So with the second option, the client would shift the risk of the markets away from herself and onto an insurance company who would promise to pay that dollar for those retirement expenses in perpetuity. So that client no longer has to worry about the ups and downs and fluctuations of the stock market. That's been shifted to the insurance company and now their problem. That client can sleep well knowing that they have the next 30 years of their retirement expenses fulfilled. Now, there are a lot of ins and outs to annuities, and I'm going to jump to an illustration, a recommendation we made to this client to solve some of her income needs. Not all of them, just some of them. So let's jump into that now. So I have an illustration open, but before proceeding, please open the attachment. You will find the illustration and you need to review the disclosures before you continue watching this video. I will not review all the disclosures today, so you will need to see them for yourself. I'm going to move down a few pages. First of all, we have the allocation. This is how the money is going to be invested. Getting beyond that and into the first hypothetical illustration, we have the client coming in with the premium of $184,603. There's a premium bonus, so that brings her up to $197,525. There is a fee on this account of 1.1%. That's the rider charge. That cost us $23.25 in that first year. It gets higher over time. We can see that as the contract value is growing, the income base is growing, leaving us with the contract value of $195,200. The cash surrender value is lower than the contract value. That's because almost all annuities include a surrender charge if you leave within some period of time, usually between 5 and 10 years. It depends on the contract. So if you decide the very next day that you no longer want this investment vehicle, well, you're going to receive $168,474 instead of the $195,000. I won't talk about the next two columns. I'm going to continue moving on. The next few pages are dedicated to hypotheticals about those investments that we chose, the 4. I'm going to get down here to the income rider so you guys can see what the guarantee there is. It's important to keep in mind that the cash in these accounts, your contract value is a different balance than your income base. Typically, the guarantees that these annuities provide is on the income base, and the income base, you can only get access to it via your distributions, your guaranteed income stream. If you want to access your real cash, say you want to leave the contract, even after the surrender period, after say 10 years like this contract, you will be left with your contract value. And usually that account is the one without the guarantees. That cash is going to grow about 2 to 3% per year, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. The real guarantees, or the guarantees I should say, are not on the real cash, but on the income base, the one that you will take income from. That is what we're seeing on this page here. Now, first of all, we see a benefit payout percentage. That percentage is usually higher or lower dependent upon your age. It's lower if you start the income earlier or younger, and it is higher if you start the income later or when you're older. In this case, if the client starts this income at about 70, it's 6.34%. So it's going to be 6.34% of whatever her income base is. And so let's walk through that. We started with 184,603. It grew to 197,525. We have our rider fee here. And on the income base, this American Equity fixed indexed annuity product is providing what they call a 7% annual compounding roll-up. So they will guarantee you 7% on the income base, not on your real cash, not the account value. So if you decide after year 10, say, she decides, I don't want that product anymore, she will not receive a balance that's equal to a 7% compounding interest on her initial investment over those 10 years. Again, that cash will earn about 2 to 3% typically. What she will have, though, on her income is access to an income that's based upon a 7% annual roll-up or compound on her initial investment. So we can see that 7%, the rider fee comes off of that $197,525, and then we multiply that remainder by 7%. We can see our income account growth. Again, income account, not a contract value, is $13,827. And so our income account value in that first year is $211,352. Whereas again, here we see the contract value is the lower amount. So if you decide that this investment's not right for you, the contract value is what you'll receive, less the surrender fees. We're not seeing that here. That's why you need to open and review the illustration attached. But just keep in mind that there are two values: the income account value, which is typically where you're going to see those nice, juicy guarantees, the 7% in this case, and your real cash, the contract value, which is most of the time it's going to move a little slower, 2 or 3%. That's why you wouldn't buy this type of investment or product if you anticipate taking that investment back, if you anticipate canceling that contract at some point in the future. You would buy this contract to generate income. So if we scroll down the page, we can see what this client's income will look like. No different than I showed you above. In the 11th year, we start income. So we held and deferred for 10 years. And we've got a payout, an annual payout for the rest of our life equal to $24,635. And that's pretty easy that math. We can work it out right here for you. So we know it's a 6.34% annual payout. So all we have to do is take the income base account balance, the end of year 10, the year before we start income, and we multiply that 562 times 6.34%, the payout rate, and we can see that that is in fact equal to our annual guarantee, $24,635. And that income will come to us even if the account balance, we can see the contract value, even if our contract value ends up being zero. And in this case, down here several years later, it ends up being zero. But regardless, the insurance company will continue making that lifetime income provided we're living. So we can see that happening all the way down until this client's, 114 years old. So we see by making a contribution to this annuity of about $185,000 or so, we receive a premium bonus. We're brought up to almost $200,000. That the client's able to generate a lifetime income stream after 10 years of about $25,000. I'm going to jump back to the planning software to see how this impacts that shortfall we talked about earlier. So we're back here in the plan, we're on the cash flow statement, and I'm going to scroll down. We see our $43,000 shortfall, annual shortfall. And what I'm going to do is open, instead of the cash flow statement, I'm going to open their income flows, her income flows. And we're going to see that income from the annuity that we just reviewed coming into the client starting at age 71, year 2032. So we waited 10 years. Now that income is kicked on. The client had an income at the time, started retirement here, and we could start this income earlier if we wanted, but it would be lower. This client has income of 140, we know that, all the way up until about 4 years when that income from the annuity kicks on, and now she goes from about 150 to about 175. So if we look at that's year 2032, we want to go back to the cash flow statement. 2032, so we'll look at year 2032, and we can see her income now goes from about 147, 150-ish to 175, and that shortfall gets cut down from $63,000 to about $40,000 per year. So there's a great demonstration of a client who is faced with a very large shortfall at retirement, who instead of using all of their retirement savings to cover that shortfall and bear all the risk, is shifting some of it over to an insurance company who will then provide her a guaranteed lifetime income stream. And that's about 1/3 of her income need. So we'll have to go back to the client to ask whether or not she wants to shift more of that risk for that income over to the insurance company. In the meantime, hopefully you guys found this video to be informative. I thank you so much for tuning in, and I do look forward to seeing you in the next episode.